Last from WA.
Excellent. So thanks everyone for coming tonight. I know most of you actually probably know Len Murray. He's been around an awfully long time. But for those of you that don't know Len has a Bachelor of Science in Physical Geology from Exeter University and a Master's of Science in Engineering Geology from Durham. And he's a registered professional engineer all over the world. He's worked pretty much all over the world too, but he started his career with KCB in 1981, and then soon after that he landed himself in Oktedi, spending some 3 years there and learning all about the joys of Papua New Guinea. So, Len's involvement in those areas led him to his long career association in Papua New Guinea, and using those experiences that he's learnt, he was involved in one of the successful design and ongoing construction of tailings and waste rock facilities at the Hidden Valley, which was the first of their kind at a major mine in PNG. Len obviously has had a vast career, and he sort of worked his way up right from junior engineer to president, board chairman of KCB. So if you give a warm welcome to Len to give his presentation.
Yeah, thanks. Good turnout, I know, because we twisted a bunch of people's arms. So. I was given the option, or at least I gave Theo, who left town before the talk, a bunch of options, and the one that was selected was this talk that I mostly gave in Denver last year to tailings and mine waste. But it has a technical flavour, but it also goes through some of my career progression, and I hope some interesting insights and into how a almost 50-year career now. This year will be my 50th. Progressed, and as I look back and reviewed my progression through my career, I'd had an inkling, and then this graph kind of confirmed it, that this is a graph basically that shows recessions. It's a treasury yield curve, whatever that is, but the vertical blue lines are recessions. And I started work in England actually in November 1974, and there was a big recession there. I don't know whether it was felt in Australia, but it was a significant recession. I then went to Alberta in Canada in 1981. I think you're seeing some kind of a pattern here. I went to Oktedi in 83 to 87, back to Vancouver in 1987. I took my first step into sort of administrative management in 96, and then I became vice president of the mining group in 2006. So you'll see there, 2001, really the world for consulting practices did change in 2001. Prior to that, each of those recessions was felt by downsizing and the workload drying up and so on for a period of time. And then in 2001, the mining industry especially really took off. There was no hint of a recession there. It was boom times. Same in 2008, which was the great financial crisis. It really didn't affect our mining practice anyway. I don't know whether others felt it. 2014 doesn't show it was a recession here, but it was, I think, in Australia. We had a bit of a tough time because of the iron ore price mostly, but also in Canada, in Alberta, because the oil price crashed. We had a lot of trouble in Alberta, but the company didn't really feel it, and we were able to give people opportunities in other parts of the company when their local practice dried up. And then I put 2022 in here because everybody was forecasting a recession, but it hasn't happened yet. Page down, page up. Oops. Oh. Sorry, I should have got this figured out. Is there a delay here? Or? Anybody know how to go backwards on this thing? Oh, those ones, no? Yeah, keep going. Let's get back. Okay, that's good. And then this one. Yeah, sorry about that. So, as I say, I started work in late 1974, and I spent the first 6 years or so of my career in the UK. I was doing relatively small infrastructure projects, but also travelling abroad to do building foundations and the like. And a lot of that work was relatively low, small-scale stuff, like these little slide you see there on the side of the road, and the railway sort of siding. That wasn't one of my jobs. I stole it off the internet. But at that point in time, the sort of one of the key issues of the day was understanding the failure of these railway cuttings in London clay. And they'd been excavated out in Victorian times really quite steeply, and then 50, 60, 70, 100 years later they would fail. And you know, the reason for that was they were fissured clays, and there was progressive failure going on at the points of the fissures. The soil was being remolded to residual, not residual strength, but remolded strength, say 20-degree friction. And as that progressed through the slope and excavation pore pressures dissipated, the slopes just failed. And you know, some of it's maybe hard to appreciate that was a big problem in those days, but you know, some of the biggest mines were dealing with that problem, and you'll see there a couple of examples of papers, but Morgenstern's name was at the top of one of those lists. And I, you know, as an engineer and geologist, more of a geological background, and I mean, the course I did at Durham was more of a geotechnical engineer, but it was quite difficult to get registered as an engineer in the UK at that time, because they didn't believe engineer and geologists were proper engineers. I know that's changed. But anyway, I did get registered, and one of the things you could do as a chartered engineer there was go and actually watch the Rankin lecture live, which I did in, must have been 1980, given by Noel Morgenstern, who at that time he'd gone to Alberta, to the University of Alberta from Imperial College, and I can't remember what the lecture was about, but the thing that I remember from that is he got up and he said, look, all you young engineers in the crowd there, you know, what are you doing dicking around with these railway cuttings from the Victorian times? There are some fantastic projects going on elsewhere in the world, and you really should get involved in them. And that sort of prompted me to look at moving to Canada, which I did eventually in 1981. So in that period in the UK, which was, you know, quite formative in the early years of your career, I did develop an interest in embankment engineering, and realized, you know, that was also an interest in dam engineering. And while I did a lot of site investigation, small construction, and work in the lab and testing in the field and stuff, that's a fantastic grounding. You really get a feel for soil when you've been out there crawling around in it, doing those small projects. And of course, you know, in those, when I started work, we were still doing calculations, or I was, with a slide rule, which I don't know if you can look it up on the internet if you're too young to know what a slide rule is. I don't know how to work it now, but you can do pretty well anything on a slide rule that you can do on your iPhone when it's turned on its side. So all the arithmetic things, sines, causes, exponents, you name it, everything you need to do a hand calculation for a slope stability type wedge failure you can do on that, and that's what I started with. And of course, you know, the technology, that's one of the big changes of my career, is just the technology. On the business side, it was interesting, and there was a bit of a legacy of this in Alberta, but not much. The engineer was really sort of on a bit of a pedestal. It was frowned on to advertise as a consulting engineer. You meant to just, you know, glory yourself in by your reputation. You know, people didn't give quotes or give schedules, or and it was, I guess you'd call it, true quality-based selection. but in my observation, it was abused quite a bit. But I think we've gone over a little bit too far the other way now, where everything's seems to be just on the value, but not the quality. So in that period as well, I got married and I started having kids, and my wife was getting sick of me being away from home. She still is. And so we decided, basically as a couple, we wanted to, move out and see the world. And following Morgenstern's advice, I ended up in Alberta actually, and with what was then Klohn in 1981. And this is a picture out of our first book, and there's lots of things to glean from this picture. The Rogues Gallery at the bottom was the management team at Klohn, and I don't think none of those guys, except maybe Ernest Portfors, would be known to the current generation, but obviously they're all male, predominantly white, as was the whole profession in those days. The guy on the left there is called Charlie Ripley, and this is one of my favourite photographs, because the guy's wearing a suit, a tie, a raincoat, and a trilby hat. And I have no idea what he's doing out there, but I did know Charlie quite well. I think he's doing a density test on the hydraulic fill. If he makes it to the other side, that's a pass. If he sinks out of sight. So, I mean, obviously the health and safety issues there are just unbelievable, but the enthusiasm for the profession is... And then the guys on the rig there, I mean, I don't know if there's any safety officers in the building, but if you don't look too closely, you'll have nightmares there. Okay, so like I said, I went to Calgary in Alberta in 1981 for 3 years, and some of the technical things that you realise that how important climate is in dam engineering. We're in a cold, dry climate there as opposed to the temperate climate in the UK. And the other thing about Alberta is it's legendary for its very high plastic shales, and these are mostly sub-horizontally bedded shales, but they have these thin myelinite zones that can be a few millimeters wide, that can extend literally for kilometers, and they can have a effective stress shear strength of as low as 6 degrees. And then as well, all the colluvium that's weathered off those has similarly low strengths. That material also swells, so if for this particular dam on the bottom right there, it had a fairly significant spillway cut, and one of the things you have to allow for there, as soon as you unload these shales, they start to swell, and you can get up to 1 meter of swell in a 20-meter cut. And that can take almost centuries. There are sites there where if you go deep enough, there are still negative pore pressures from when the ice melted off there 10,000 years ago. So just knowing stuff like that, you get a real respect for soil and the unknown and the unexpected. Again, at that point in time, Klohn head office was in Vancouver. The only other substantial office was Calgary in Alberta. And like I said, when I went there in 1981, there was the oil price just crashed out of sight, and Alberta's entire economy is based on oil. I managed to stay employed. Fortunately, a lot of my friends didn't through that period. And I wanted to just also talk a little bit about some of the lessons I learned there. And one of the things, because the water dams that Klohn worked on were funded by the province that was equally funded by oil and gas revenue, all of that dried up, all of the stuff in the oil sands dried up. And we got another business line, if you like, doing heap leach designs in mountainous terrain. And I don't know if you don't see, I don't know how much people know about heap leach, but in that particular environment, what they did was they basically built a little start tow dike, and then they put down a clay layer and a HDP liner on the top of it, and then they loaded it up with the ore. And again, knowing you know, there's low friction strength clays out there, and also suspecting interface friction issues. We did a bunch of testing on interface friction, not with that glorious apparatus down there, but just with a 2-inch or 4-inch shear box, direct shear box. And sure enough, we found that this particular combination at this site had a low shear strength. We did the stability analysis, and we found, you know, that well, we had a factor of safety of less than 1. The thing was going to fail if they ever got to maximum height there. The bottom left is just a simple hand calculation, and you know, at that point in time, I think we'd thrown the slide reels out, but we were using a Commodore 64, if anyone remembers those, a 64K. Memory was, you know, you had to sign up to get access to it. And so, you know, we did a hand calculation because you really need to be certain what you're going to tell people. So I went into my boss and told him the story, and I don't know whether he went away and did a hand calc, but anyway, he phoned the client up and he said, look, your heap leach is going to fail. And the mining client, of course, said, you're absolutely crazy, you're out of your tree, we build these things all over the place, and we've never had a failure. And a little bit to my surprise, my boss stuck to his guns, and we got kicked off the job, of course. Which, you know, at that point in time, when your actual job is on the line, you know, I kind of admired the guy for sticking to his guns. At the same time, you know, it maybe wasn't a good employment decision as far as I was. And then I kind of put this whole thing out of my mind, and when I put this talk together, I went back into the literature, and I couldn't even remember the name of the mine, so I found that paper by a fellow called Brighton back there from '97, and you don't need to read the matrix, but what it is it's a list of all the heap leaches and the landfills that failed, and the vast majority of them are because of you know, liner interface and failure at the base there. Another thing, you know, for the younger people in the group, and I certainly didn't realise it at the time, but you know, going through Klohn and Klohn Crippen Berger and all the other names we had with this group of people here, and you know, who took over management from the founders really, but those guys at the bottom, and you probably don't recognise many of them, maybe some of you recognise Harvey and Brian Watson, Bill Quinn, and Bill Chin and people. But you know, when you start working with these people, you can see the pictures at the top there. The chances of these guys apparently making it to fellowship in the Engineering Institute of Canada would look fairly remote, I think. But at the same time, going through a career with a cohort like that who just push you, you know, and you're always measuring yourself up against a fantastic group of people. And I would certainly encourage any young people to look around at their peer group and just, you know, see whether they think they can go through a career together and have that sort of influence on each other. So again, a brief period in Alberta, but lots of learnings there, and you know, the process in Alberta was much more of a modern project management process, and writing proposals and all that sort of stuff. Certainly did that. And again, you know, again for the younger people in the audience, I think when you leave university and you really, you know, you still don't really know anything except how to do analyses, it's hard to connect what you're doing with actual reality. And but you know, what we do is real, and you know, there's real consequences to it. And you know, I think this whole issue of this heap leach failing was a kind of wake-up call to me. I realised what I was doing was pretty important, and that, you know, in order for me to be certain that I wasn't you know, just a victim of a bad program, you know, this whole business of doing hand checks was a major part of my process even to this day. On the business side, you know, I learned how you know, we're all victims of economic conditions, and as I say that, you know, maybe a lot of people who didn't start their career till the 2000s haven't seen a real recession in the business yet, but it's not a lot of fun. And you can read some of the others. I will say, you know, in Calgary we were down to a 3-day week, which was why losing that heat bleach business was a bit of a hard take. But you know, it was also at its upside. I don't remember being particularly concerned about it, even though I had a young family and, you know, I was a recent immigrant to Canada. And then again, for people who maybe haven't gone through one of these recessions, and I know people are concerned at the moment about burnout because we're too busy. Well, let me tell you, when all your friends are being fired and they're losing their houses because they can't pay the mortgage, that is much, much harder. And of course, there's a lot less reward out there because nobody's making any money. So partly because of the concern over future employment prospects at Klohn, Klohn Leonov also got a job at Octedi. And I'm sure some of you have heard of the Okma tailings dam, which I've got a little bit of a slide on it later, but that dam failed during excavation of the foundation. They went out to an international competition to see who could come up with an alternate tailings dam site, and we were lucky enough to get on that. But Octedi, I mean, Papua New Guinea in general is either it's a geotechnical engineer's dream or it's a nightmare, and both at the same time. The picture up on the right there is the Hindenburg Wall, which is also on the plan, but it's a many hundreds of meters high vertical limestone cliff, or whatever you want to call it. And around 10,000 years ago, they had a multi-cubic kilometer slide off that cliff. And that slide, it basically blanketed the whole left bank of the Octedi River there, which is that polluted-looking brown strip through the middle. But it covered over the local geology, which was a very high plastic, low-strength shales, with several hundred meters of colluvium landslide, which was like a gravelly, sandy limestone landslide that then subsequently cemented up a little bit. So if you think about it, the left bank of the Octedi there had this stable environment covered in landslide debris. The other side, where the Okma is, was these high plastic shales. They were slaking shales. As soon as they got exposed, they just went to mush. And what wasn't exposed rock was basically a mushy, muddy colluvium. So as I said, there's been a lot of papers written on the Okma Dam failure, but from my perspective and the group that came from Alberta, for us it was just business as usual. A high plastic shale. It was actually dipping down dip into towards where they did the excavation for the foundation. The overburden was derived from that from that high plastic low strength shale and was no better. So digging a small hole at the toe just reactivated that massive landslide and abandoned the site. We came up with another site which was down where you see that meander in the bottom corner of the air photograph there, and that's actually a rock joint controlled meander, and it's a limestone gorge which we came up with a design for. Having said that, we went out there as a family sort of after we'd done the initial investigation, and about 4 months in we were all ready to start the construction there, and the mining company said no, we don't feel confident that the consequences of a dam failure there would be livable for us, and I'm kind of glad they didn't. Not because the dam site, we could have built a dam there, but there's no way on God's earth you could reliably close that. You could have closed that mine, that tailings dam, because the catchment upstream was so huge. So we went on to put together a scheme for the Okmenga hydro plant, which you may have heard of. It's a 50 megawatt hydro plant. It turned out, you know, when the Octedi mine was being developed, the Bechtel, I think, had bought all the equipment and had various sites to put this hydro scheme in there, but every time they dug a hole, it fell in on them. So our group was able to find locations for the powerhouse and the intake. And again, I think we approached it more from an engineering geology point of view, and you know, using that colluvium landslide material, we're able to find decent sites for that. So kind of the learnings on a project scale were, you know, if you have experience in things, stuff is so obvious to you that is not obvious to others. And you know, again, that's when I go around the world looking at different sites, one of the first things I try and do is find out what the geomorphology is. What's the history of the site? Has it been glaciated? Has it been subject to sea level fall or drop? Or, you know, is there a big transform fault going through the middle of it, or is there a big regional landslide? And there are always people there who, you know, have made that area of the world their career, and they're often in universities at geological faculties. Also at Octedi, you know, I mean, it's a graveyard for landslides, but one of the important things there that is an easy observation to make, if you go to a site in the tropics and there's no red tropical soil, and you know, red tropical soil isn't the easiest thing to deal with, the chances are you know, it hasn't been around long enough to oxidize, and you're dealing with active landsliding. And I think Octedi, the rule of thumb is there that 65% of the region is active landslides, and the other 35 is just taking a rest. So, and then, you know, lastly then on the projects, again, even a small excavation at the toe of something can create a huge landslide. And doesn't mean to say you can't excavate and work in there, but you have to do it in panels and very, very carefully. On the business side, as I say, you know, I was impressed with our project manager at the time. We were, you know, I think 6 or 7 families had relocated from Canada to Octedi, and within 4 months we were threatened with being sent home. He found this alternate project that they had no idea how they were going to do, namely the Okmenga Hydro, and we all moved on to that for 2 or 3 years, which was fantastic. And at the same time, you know, knowing the industry, we were able to take advantage of the fact that BC Hydro had finished you know, many decades construction program, and they were laying off people, so we were able to get up some real talent on the electrical mechanical side to do that at Okmenga Hydro. I think on the social side, you know, there aren't many opportunities now for people to relocate there with their families, and you know, that's been replaced by FIFOs, which I think actually is, you know, probably as hard on a family as moving. When I finished up at Octedi, I went to Vancouver, and this period 87 to 95, which should be between the red arrows there, was a bit of a lull in my career in some ways. I was, you know, at that point in time, a project manager just taking on projects basically, and at the same time the company was changing because the founders were basically moving out. Some of my peers were looking at additional offices. We moved into Eastern Canada in Sudbury and Lima there in Peru, and also started up in Brisbane. And we had a model for organic growth, basically following on the coattails of our clients and projects and things. It worked well for a while, and it's a very difficult thing to do, and it also needs a very dedicated senior person to do it. On the technical side, again, you know, as you go on in your career, you realise maybe some projects you've been part of for a bit too long, and you have your ingrained biases and things, and I think it's healthy to turn over management, project management, technical resources on a project in a measured way. You know, it's difficult to do because often the company you're working for is quite happy, you're not making any problems, you're getting repeat work. The client often, you know, is very appreciative of what would be the EOR now. But having said that, I think you do need to turn these things over, and it's inevitable, it's going to happen. You might as well plan for it. And I think, you know, with the GISTM and succession planning, and now that's more ingrained in the process, but it was difficult to do there. On the social side, you know, as I say, that whole Octetti experience and a later experience in Thailand was just a game changer for life, really. And you know, I would recommend it if anybody has the opportunity to do that kind of thing. So we move on to 1996, which was another recession, and at that point in time you see the orange dots, which were our initially quite successful overseas and out of Western Canada ventures. They're pretty well in the recession of 96, which was when the Japanese economy created, I think, and the Japanese got out of mining in a big way, and China hadn't taken off yet. There was a real downturn in the industry, and that meant our regional offices there basically went down to a skeleton staff. But we stuck with them, which was a good decision in hindsight. Also, you know, the founders were continuing to leave because the opportunities at Klohn didn't look very promising. We had a lot of loss of high-end staff and senior technical staff and so on due to lack of opportunities. But, you know, the last guy standing, me, got a job as managing the Vancouver mining group there, which was all of, I think, 12 people at that point in time. And, you know, as I guess the new team there, my peer group, sort of took over the management, we realized that a lot of the company problems was just poor business management. Often, you know, we were losing money to the point where we weren't making any profits because of write-offs on projects, and the write-offs were due to, there was often not a contract, because scopes weren't defined, nobody really cared about getting paid. And again, this speaks to the previous generation who were very much gentlemen engineers who didn't want to get their hands dirty with money. So, you know, that was one of the things that we had to put right. And, you know, looking back, I think to myself, well, why didn't I go? I mean, the future didn't look too bright, to be perfectly honest. But I think one of the reasons was that the company really aligned with what I was interested in doing. And, you know, I maintained projects in dams, and, you know, that's what kept me happy, I suppose. And all this other stuff was kind of going over my head, and I wasn't too worried about it because I knew if I got laid off, I could always go and, you know, had the skill set to work somewhere else. The other thing I learned as I got into management, and I think I'd learned it from my previous project managers, is that when the hard times hit, and as a hard message to give to people, it's best to be transparent, because we all know we work with very smart people. You're not going to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, and it's best to really tell it like it is. And personally, and for the company to have a plan, and our plan was to stick to our knitting, but also try and expand the service offering we gave, because in the early days, you know, we were retained to build a dam, and we all know that tailings disposal is so much more than a dam. It's, you know, it's geochemistry, it's closure, it's full life cycle, it's deposition. You know, we got into all of that stuff, and, you know, it's paid off over the years. And we did it all with money that we earned and not money that we borrowed, which, you know, is not a popular approach to life, I don't think, in the business community, but that's what we did. And we put in a proper quality system, and we diversified both in those service sectors within our area of expertise, but also geographically. You know, I guess the transition to management is an interesting thing to look back on, because certainly the people who took over the company were technical engineers, and you know, people over the years have said, well, you're taking your best people out of the project stream and putting them into management, which is true. But would you rather, you know, I'm only speaking for companies like Klohn here that are, you know, more of a sort of mid-sized now engineering company, but for us, we would much rather be managed by colleagues and professional engineers and geoscientists than lawyers and accountants, and you know, and that allowed us to have the mindset that business success was an outcome of technical excellence. So we focused on the technical side, we put in the business controls, so that earnings was an outcome of our professional work, not vice versa. And you know, it's maybe a small mindset, but it's paid off for us, and I think we're very comfortable with it. Again, you know, we did a lot of work on things like company values, and I'm sure that especially a lot of the younger people see the you know, mission, vision, and all that sort of stuff, and the company values, and they think it's just you know, words. But when, you know, for me, when I got into management, it was really a big deal, because you know, you're making decisions all the time, and every so often there's one comes up and you think, you know, that's not a 2-second decision. And I would look at the one of those graphics there is the company values and things. I would look at that and try and make a decision in line with the company values, and that certainly, you know, was a big part of my technique there as a manager. And partly because we were a group of engineers, it happened, and engineering geologists who were running the company. We had to surround ourselves by very proficient business people, the CFO, the HR, the IT, the quality, because, you know, they know their business and we know our business, and you need to take their advice. But at the same time, you know, you're directing them based on your vision for technical excellence and so on. So we did diversify very significantly, and you can see the list there, and even right up to the last few years we've gone into the UK and a couple more places in South America and Ireland and stuff. A couple of things that, as I said, you know, you're relying on your business professionals to support you in management. And even though, you know, I took a whole raft of courses there, certainly didn't know finance and stuff as deep as them, but we came up with some very simple metrics that apply really to the company and to a project, whatever, which is at the bottom bullet there. If you can get your utilization times markup, which is known as revenue factor, above 2, it's happy. It's less than 2, you've got a problem. Utilization being the number of hours you spend doing project work that you will eventually get paid for, divided by the number of total hours that the company spends in a time period, times the markup on people's rates. That's the revenue factor. If it's over than 2, happy days. The second one there, day sales. Basically all that is you look at your revenue for the year, you divide it by 365, that's the amount of sales you do in a year. In the consulting business, you're always filling out timesheets, and by the end of the month you've got, you know, an average of 15 days of money that you've paid to your employees that you haven't been reimbursed from clients, and then you've got to go through the whole billing process and, you know, getting your clients rejected by, your invoice rejected by Rio. And going through, anyway, if you can get paid within 80 days, 80 sales days, then, you know, you're good. And then lastly is write-offs, which was really the bane of the company and why we almost went out of business in 1996. If you can keep your write-offs to less than 1% of revenue, again, you're in a happy place. Bearing in mind, though, that that can still be a huge chunk of your actual earnings. So down the bottom, in addition to colour photography, obviously we've diversified. This is sort of up and coming. Some of them are managers now, some of them will be. you know, we have gender diversity, we have diversity in nationalities for sure. And also, you know, you can see in the top right where we were in '96 and where we are now, and certainly we've managed to diversify geographically, and that's, you know, come from many people putting in hours of work in order to do that. So I did become Vice President of Mining in 2006, and then President in 2014. And you'll see there in 2008, well, let me go back to 2001, as I was saying. When I became manager of the Vancouver mining piece of Klohn in 1996, we started tracking proposals and, you know, and projects that we won and all that stuff. So we had plots going back half a dozen years, and you know, more or less there wasn't much growth in the company until 2001. In 2001, those graphs just absolutely took off. I mean, the number of proposals coming in was astronomical. The success rate went through the roof, and I think we did make a mistake of hiring too quickly and maybe not being discriminating enough in what we were doing, but that was a massive change. And since then, there really hasn't been a significant worldwide downturn in the industry. As I said, there's been local issues in 2014 and 2008 with the great financial crisis, 2014 with iron ore and oil going in the tank. But certainly we were able to stick handle through those quite comfortably. So I've got about half a dozen slides here of some of the review of what I've been talking about, and this one, major challenges in, you know, close to a 50-year career, and obviously changes rather. The transition from slide rule to what effectively are supercomputers, and now we can tether computers in the cloud and run parallel, God knows what else. I mean, I don't know how to do it, but other people do for their groundwater models and their coupled geochemistry and groundwater models and reactive transport models and deformation models, and, you know, I'm sure you know the list in your area of expertise. But the surprise, you know, is really that the demand for our services as, you know, as engineers and scientists hasn't really gone down. And I know somebody asked me, well, have you looked at how many people are employed? And no, I haven't. But certainly it seems like we're busier than ever we were before, even with the advent of these supercomputers. And I got a sense that AI is going to be similar if we're smart enough to take advantage of it. That's not going to change our parameters there very much. As we've all grown as companies and, you know, moved into the technology era, that means there are different people that we're hiring, the IT professionals, the programmers, and so on. But you know, I am concerned that we're maybe losing touch with the fundamentals. You know, especially the younger engineers seem to believe that models are reality. You read the report and they'll say the leakage from this tailings dam will be X leak. No, it won't. That's what your model says. The only thing I can tell you is your model's going to be wrong. It's either going to be more or less than that. So I do think we may be losing touch with the fundamentals, and that's where I really encourage everybody to get their iPhone calculator out and do hand checks just to make sure that, you know, what you're getting out of the computers in the ballpark. The more diverse workforce, which I think is fantastic, both, you know, gender and different nationalities. I think we're all seeing the benefits of that. It's all good. At the same time, there's a huge competition for talent, and there's so many more opportunities for people who have a science bent. They can go into many professions other than engineering and science. So you know, that's a big challenge for us to project, you know, what a great career you can have in this business, and people still see it as very boom bust and you know, a bit of a hard-nosed profession to get into. I've talked about the disconnect between recessions and employment in the engineering industry. I don't know if that's a forever thing. I seriously doubt it. You know, as we get further away from those previous recessions, people need to be aware of, you know, what the tactics were and things for getting through them. I'm not going to go through the list, but I'll just pick out there. You know, you can see climate change and ESG and things which are super important. I just want to talk a little bit about the rise of procurement. And as I said, we went from the gentleman engineer of the previous generation who really didn't want to get their hands dirty with contracts and things, to a situation now where I think, you know, it's hard to deal with your counterparts, often in the bigger clients, to explain how what you can do can really benefit them in a huge way. That all just gets, it seems, into a contract sort of meat grinder, and the contracts guys try and beat you down as much as they can and or go with the lowest cost bid, irrespective of, you know, where their real money's going, which is often not on the actual project and the dam itself. And of course, the expansion in the tailings business, I've talked about that already. We're not just dam designers anymore, but there's that whole galaxy of things that we do. And again, I'm just selecting a few here from the technical lessons. I'm sure you're all getting desperate for your next drink. So, in terms of technical lessons, I still, you know, want to emphasize that if you're a designer, you have to go to site, because no matter drone photos or slideshows or anything will get you the same as a site visit. And, you know, I remember going to one site and, you know, there's this big tailings dam, an upstream tailings dam, and we'd all been looking at the sections, and then you get to the top of the dam and there's a huge open pit down there, and you said, well, has anybody actually looked at it? And it turned out that they were balancing the excavation in the pit with the movement of the dam. I said, well, that's not a really smart idea, because your tailings dam has contractive material in it. And, you know, being, I guess, an engineering geologist by profession, I still think understanding that geomorphology and the engineering geology and all that stuff is just so fundamental to building a good facility. And as I say, that, you know, again, that took a turn for the better in the late 1990s, and prior to that you were getting brownie points for the less investigation you did, the more chance you had of winning the job. In terms of analysis, you know, the stuff you can do with CPTs these days, I mean, I'm sure it'll make you a cup of coffee if you ask it, but, you know, and again, you know, I think we've got to take it all with a pinch of salt. We can come up with critical state parameters and peak and residual strengths and so on and so forth, but you've got to keep in mind, you know, again, that understanding of the engineering geology and how things were deposited and stuff. Is it telling you the right stuff? I've got a bullet there for critical state soil mechanics that I'm not going into. I think it just about killed the Ancold guys yesterday. And we've got to find ways of calibrating these analyses, these super deformation and other analyses. And I know we can do that with instrumentation, but often there is a lag between, you know, if you're deformation analysis, obviously you want to put inclinometers in, but you need to then track how they perform as they are, you know, as you're raising the dam and stuff. And also there is stuff where you can't actually maybe do that calibration, because if you're looking at an earthquake-based failure or a brittle failure, you can't get those calibrations from your instruments. So we've got to think of other ways of doing it. And sure, you can calibrate your constitutive model to lab tests and things, but how are we going to, you know, as we get more and more removed from the actual analysis process, how are we going to prove to ourselves that the analysis is good? Because you can bet your life nobody's going to sue R2-D2 over in the corner there who's, you know, artificially intelligent. They're going to come after companies and people. So I think I've maybe been through some of these cautions, but has the capability of the engineering profession match the strength of the analyses, because, you know, as we get into critical state and stuff like that, how many people have actually really understand that? I know there's a group of people out there who've been doing it for years and have a good feeling, and the rest of us are trying to catch up. Blind faith in models, I've explained. And you might be surprised at the lack of adequate case history database. And, you know, we've had 4 or 5 big failures in the last few years that have gone through forensic audits, but that's out of tens of thousands of dams. And we're doing quite a bit of work in Brazil for what they call the declassification of these dams, and because they're upstream dams that are very like Brumadinho and so on. And to be honest, there's nothing you could see why these ones haven't failed and these ones have, and I think understanding that is an interesting thing to try and do. I think as we get into, you know, this fixation with dilative and compressive materials, we're also losing losing sight of some of these other types of failures, like I talked about with the shales, the very low effective stress friction angles in residual shales and high plastic materials. In terms of business lessons, again, you know, because the company almost went out of business, we definitely, my generation, put a lot more emphasis on transition, and I think we, you know, modestly did a pretty good job of it. The company's basically turned over the management between 2016 and 2022. That it's almost a completely new group now, and there was no sort of business implications to that. Looking back over the 50 years, as I say, you know, the project management and quality system and so on was so important in bringing us into you know, being a much more successful company than we were in the first sort of 20-30 years. If we did make a mistake in the early years, it was because we were hiring and not selectively enough. It's, you know, it's better to turn a job down because you don't have the people than hire a bunch of people who don't know how to do it, and you know, then you're left picking up the pieces. What went right? As I say, the company almost went out of business in 1999. The founders basically sold half the company to a company called Lewis Berger Group, LBG, who were a transportation group based in New York, effectively. And they came in, and they were one of the driving forces between us getting proper business systems and project management systems in place. They were very interested in that, and you know, it's paid off over the years. And for those of you who don't know, Lewis Berger was subsequently bought by WSP, so we are now, WSP own half of our shares, but you know, after a little bit of a rocky start, they've now taken more of the position that LBG did, and if we cut them a check twice a year, they basically leave us alone. As I've already said, we persisted with these regional and international offices that did go down to, I remember, I don't know if any of you know Mark Thompson, but Mark Thompson's garage was our office for quite a few years, until the termites got in there. You know, we kept to our core business, although we did diversify. It was within the understanding of the management group, because it's always nice to know what you're getting into, and moved out geographically there. And one thing, you know, I think for almost 30 or 40 years the company had this delusion that, you know, if the staff had a good idea for some research topic, we'd do it internally. And you know, having tried that multiple years and failed, we eventually realized that it's so much better to take that money and sponsor universities and students there, because A, they're cheap as chips, B, it's what they want to do and it's their core business. So, you know, you can really make some impressions by, you know, things that we know need to be done to improve our professional work and you know, what we have time to do. Just a quick one on, again, we're a mid-sized company. I don't see any dark clouds on the horizon anywhere in the industry, and especially not for niche companies like ourselves who do mining and hydropower. the ankle conference was basically, just desperate for hydrotechnical engineers to fulfill the dam construction plans that most of these water authorities have, and that is going to filter down to us because it's the same skill set or very similar skill set to tailings engineers. I still feel that organic growth is a great way to go. You pick the people you want, as opposed to buying companies and maybe finding that once the period of retention is gone, the key people leave and you're left with the people they didn't want. And that diversification is good, but it can be taken too far. And I don't think we want to get into selling hamburgers, even though we're often introduced as Klohn Crippen Berger these days. I think this is my last slide. Some advice to the young professionals, if you want it. I know you're always asking for advice; it's harder to take it. In your career planning, I hear so much about, you have to have a career plan, and by the time I'm 6 years into my career, I want to be managing projects, and then I want to be managing people, and I really don't think that's a good way to go, because you should enjoy what you're doing. And certainly I never had an intention of getting into management. I just liked working, designing dams and things. But it still happened, and I found out I was interested in it, but I didn't force it in any way. And I think you can get too rigid in your program. I guess from what I read on what my kids tell me, I'm not on many social media platforms. But and again, you can even do that within one company. I mean, I have dozens of careers within the Klohn Crippen umbrella there. So enjoy what you're doing and do it because it's what you enjoy, and then take the opportunities as they come along. And also, you have to take your profession seriously, because I know, when you come out of university and you start up, the job isn't the big the big part of your life that it may eventually become. But I remember, one of the things I used to do religiously was go around the offices and talk to the young professionals group. And I remember this one guy getting up in Vancouver and saying, "Why do you treat us like professional engineers?" And what he meant by that was, in BC, the labour law is if you're a professional engineer and you work over 40 hours, you get straight time, right? And this guy wanted to get time and a half and double time at the weekends and things. And I had to say to him, "Look, you are a professional, and we're going to treat you like a professional. If you don't like that as your career, go and work in Starbucks, and you can be a principal and associate immediately, and you maybe can make a good cup of coffee out of it." Lost my track there. And then, as I say, understanding these macro forces that can influence your career. I mean, with more couples getting into careers, high-level professional careers, the family requirements. I really had no restrictions on me, but my wife had to give up her career ambitions basically because of that. And then take the opportunities that present themselves and the ones you're able to do. I mean, don't be too hard on yourself if you can't take off to Papua New Guinea for 3 years. Just do the opportunities and have patience. And I think eventually you'll get to the level of your own incompetence, as they say, which is presumably what I achieved. And then, speaking to the converted, I'm sure really getting involved in industry and professional organisations is a huge it's a huge benefit to yourself and the industry, and just meeting people and things. It's something I maybe didn't do enough of because of usually a hectic travel schedule, but it's definitely something you need to get to. Okay, so that's all I have to say, and I'd like to hear some questions, whether people can remember anything I said or not. If there are any questions.
Yeah. Alan McConnell is one old fart to another one.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because I know the answer from my point of view, if you could start all over again and do it different, would you? Or are you
No, I
happy?
wouldn't. I don't think I'd do anything.
That's where I'm positioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. The only thing I'd rather do than be what I am is be a rock and roll singer. But I'd probably have died a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I might have been a professional footballer, but I didn't kick a ball.
Yeah.
So
That's really good.
Yeah.
It's clear from listening to you, and that's what you think.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. No, and I mean that's why I'm still working at 50 years in. So I just and there's many people in my sort of condition as well who just love what they're doing. So.
I have a question.
Hold on.
Okay. So, you've always been in the consulting side.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about how your relationship with clients changed, and I hope to the best?
Yeah.
Right. So how did it change? How was, the perception from the client towards, the consulting companies, and how, if you look at JSM, there is this promotion of clients and they are working together, they're all responsible for the same thing.
Yeah.
Have you seen that really changing with time?
Oh yeah, for sure. And in the talk I gave yesterday to Ankled, I had the org chart from the GISTM up there with the registered tailings professionals and the accountable executive and the board and the engineer of record. And I think looking back, that example I gave of being fired off a project because the client didn't like what you told them, they just were going to go ahead and build it and they just wanted you to rubber stamp it. Can you hear me all right without the mic? Or?
Mike's better. Mike's better.
The mic's better? Okay.
So again, when I first got into the mining profession, you would go to a site and there was jokes around that nobody knew where the tailings area was, and that wasn't quite true. I mean, they followed the pipeline every so often and found where it ended. But certainly there were many mines where there were closed facilities that nobody had any clue they were there. And I think one site we're working on right now, they had something like 65 referable dams when we dug into it, and they only thought they had half a dozen. That was a shock. So, in the good old bad old days, you'd go to a site and often you'd be greeted by the tailings operator because the mill manager was too busy, and you'd make your recommendations or whatever, and you had no idea what happened above that and probably not a lot, as long as they didn't hear any bad news from the tailings area, it wasn't a problem. But now, it's a very close relationship between the engineer or designer of record and, to some pretty high levels in the organization. A lot of projects we work on, we have escalation criteria that could take the EOR right to board level if there was a big problem. And, and that's even above the accountable executive. But, what I've found is the accountable executives are taking their responsibility very, very seriously, and at the same time they're not engineers or scientists, or what they may be, but not in tailings, and they're really relying on the professional staff, the TRBs, the peer reviews, and the engineer of record and things, and it's just such more what it should be. And coming from BC, of course, there are legal obligations for the EOR that, we all knew that stamping and signing drawings was your profession on the line, but now, there's this legal overlay on it. And for the mining companies, if they want to change an EOR, they have to give a rationale to the government why they're doing it, and they have to publish it and, go through a bit of a process to change the EOR. So it's so much more favourable to the, I think to the whole system is just so much more bulletproof. And one of the things that the Ankled guys asked me was, well, now we're all so busy, and now you've layered on this engineer of record, design engineer, you've got TRBs, you've got peer reviews and DSRs, and off to the side you've got the regulators who have their own subject matter experts because they're usually underfunded. How are you ever going to cope? And I think we are coping as an industry, which is why we're so busy. And that's why I'm also looking forward to things like AI that can maybe take some of the stress off us and leave us to think. And it's that whole thinking process that I think is where our profession needs to get to.
Len, do you think, just with what you were saying there in terms of, to think, like I've noticed in my career, there's certainly a change in how graduates are coming out of universities now. Their ability to think is actually less than probably what it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And have that problem-solving innate, inbuilt feeling. Do you feel that sort of, that the industry as a whole is almost dumbing down? Or do you feel that, there's definitely still, great advances to be made?
Well, I have a lot of faith in human nature, partly because, that my generation was written off by the people before. I'm a bunch of hippies, just wanted to get drunk all the time. But the fact is, I'm sure that, the younger generation has a different sort of mentality than we had. But I think it's, as people get more experience and they start to understand things, that they will, to have a critical mindset, you need to know what all the pieces are and what you need to think about. And, it takes 10 years or so to get that, which is, one of the reasons, I think women get frustrated in our businesses because it does take a long time to get to the top. And, although our company is, we pride ourselves in being equal opportunity, that, you have to have that experience before you can get into managing the company. And we're just starting to see that now after many years in employing women, because there was no woman in our, going off track here, but in our company really until the late 90s. Now we're 1/3, 2/3. But, in terms of critical thinking, it's, it's something we always talk about, that people don't think very critically, but I think that's just experience.
Len, just thinking about COVID and people working from home, you mentioned about young engineers coming into the ranks. What are your thoughts on how they can get the mentoring they need when half the time people are either on sites or not in the office anyway?
Yeah, and that is a worry for us. And I think, that's just a reality of life that we're going to have to work through. And I'm sure what we're going to find is the smart people realize that to get the full benefit of, people call it mentoring. We used to call it criticism and abuse, but, I think the smart people will realize that they need to be around their senior staff just to know how the business works. And, it's like a veteran on a sports team. You don't know you're going to go out there with a broken leg and, play in the hockey final or something until you see somebody else do it. And it's a stressful business. Most of us, I'm sure, have been up at night worrying about things. It's not a Shangri-La sort of existence. Sorry, there was a question from over there.
Hi, sorry, it's a very obvious question, but that clay liner that you installed in Canada, did it fail or not? Because your manager clearly stuck his neck out. So
it failed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the year after, I guess by the time they put some ore on it, it failed. And like I say, I put it out of my mind. I can't even remember what site it was, but I found that paper by Brighton back there that just listed about 20 sites that had exactly that failure. And it's hard to believe that people didn't think about interface and the strengths of the clay liner at the bottom, but they didn't.
Yeah.
How, as you started off as a more technical person and then moving into managing projects than people, how have you kind of personally managed, I don't know, like wanting to know everything technically versus having to not completely let things go, but you can't have your head around everything, so yeah, how?
Yeah, that's interesting, because you know, when I was vice president of the mining group, I was able to be 30 to 40% chargeable. And then when I took over as president in 2014, like I say, we had a bit of a crisis in Alberta and Australia, and it took most of my time. And then about 2 years, you know, it was a new job, so about 2 years in, I suddenly thought to myself, well, I wasn't really doing any technical work. I better try and get back into the technical side of things. And you know, I think there's one advantage of working in a company like Klohn, there's always space for reviewers and so on. So I basically built up, you know, fairly quickly back to where I was. And you know, it was a matter of getting comfortable with, you know, running a company. Once you get used to it and you get the right people around you, it really does more or less run itself, and gives you time for this other stuff. So, and I was also going around. All our offices there, I'd visit them twice a year, so I was all over the place. So it was easy for me to, you know, get interesting projects anywhere in the world. I hope that answered your question. Anything else? There's a bunch of good questions.
It was. So I'd just like to say a word of thanks from the QTG Len for spending your time while you're out here. It is alcohol, you know, wouldn't be any less. So I think we can all put our hands together to celebrate. There's still the bar and some good bit of food if you're interested in hanging on and having a chat with Len and just amongst yourselves. Thanks very much.
Thank you.